Hey, welcome to a Market of the Moment update, week of March 28, 2022. Michael Oldham here with Chris Madrid. What's up?
Hey, man.
Hey. Chris and I got a little closing later today, so work some real estate and mortgage magic.
Oh, yeah.
So, well, let's dive into this week's data. We missed last week, but I know a lot of things happened with the mortgage rates. Not a lot happened with real estate numbers in the last couple of weeks, but I think the mortgage rates give us plenty to talk about. So take it away, Chris.
Yeah, so it was kind of interesting, right? I mean, this is the week of March 27th, right? So at the end of last week, we saw rates like pop to the highest level that we've seen, this year. And which essentially was, on a 30-year fix, you're up to, 5.1 to 5.2, right? So it was an interesting end of week, to say the least. But here's the flip side, right? Is we all know from a rates perspective, like in general, rates are trending up, right? But we also see that, we see coming, the Fed is going to be increasing the federal funds rate. Now, to be super clear, when the Fed says they're raising interest rates 5 to 6 more times, right, in 2022, that doesn't mean mortgage rates directly, right? They're not going to, the Fed doesn't control mortgage rates per se, so they can't increase mortgage rates. So that's the biggest thing that every time I get on the phone with someone, they're like, well, yeah, the Fed's gonna be raising rates. And I'm like, well, hold on. That's a totally different rate that we're talking about. Now, it does indirectly impact mortgage rates, but it is not mortgage rates directly. So the federal funds rate is the interest rate that banks lend to each other overnight, right? And your prime rate, so anytime you hear of prime, is normally 3% over the Fed funds rate. So prime rate is typically tied to your lines of credit, credit cards. Those are the kind of the short-term revolving stuff is what is normally tied to prime, car loans, all that kind of stuff. So again, like I think we maybe even mentioned this 2 weeks ago, is we know that the federal funds rate is going up, which means that your borrowing on short term is going to get more expensive. So again, this would be a really good time for you to proactively get your debt paid down, right? If you have outstanding credit cards, get those suckers paid down as quickly as possible, because it will end up costing you more, right? Now, of course, jobs, the jobs report came out. We were waiting on that yesterday. Jobs report came out. It was better than expected. Or I guess it was slightly more than expected. So we had initial jobless claims increase by about 14,000, which took the total number to around 200,000, 202,000, which has basically come off the lowest reading in almost, like, this is the crazy part, right? The lowest reading in almost 53 years. So continuing claims, which are those that continue to receive benefits after their initial claim, decreased by 35,000. So essentially, people that were on unemployment have, 35,000 of those have now come off, which takes I think the total number down to about 1.3 million, which is a low going back to like 1969. So one of the things too is we've seen that in the private sector, wages are up, right? So that, again, we're hoping that, I think they've reported about 10.5% is what in the private sector, what we've seen as far as wages go. So the idea and the hope is that, obviously the increase, the rise in wages would then offset or help with the increase in one, in property values, right? Which essentially is how much you can purchase a home for, and then of course the rise in interest rates as well. Because again, it's both, right? At this particular point, you're paying more, probably more than you've ever paid for a home, and then also with regards to mortgage rates, those are now at the at the highest level. So yeah, man, I think overall mortgage rates are still trending upward. The good news, right? So the good news is we do see a dip coming. Now, is that going to be at the end of the year? Is that going to be next year? That's the unknown component, right? we know that the federal funds rate is going up to combat inflation, right? Bonds, which are tied to mortgage rates, absolutely hate inflation. So as the Federal Reserve increases the Fed funds rate to help combat inflation, we should then see what ends up happening is a recession, right? So anytime the federal funds rate goes up, it kind of throttles the economy into a recession. Then we definitely see mortgage rates dip. So at this point, if you're purchasing a home, I would not recommend. Like I got a quote this morning that I'm going through from another lender. I had a customer, send it over to review, and this Rocket Mortgage, I think, is who sent it over, and they're trying to charge them 3.5 points, right? And that absolutely makes zero sense to me, especially when, again, we feel pretty confidently about, maybe even next year, right? Interest rates dropping back down to the threes, right? Possibly low fours. So if that happens, then you just wasted a significant amount of dollars to feel good about the rate that you got, right? And again, that would take that's essentially taking their rate from high fours, so call it 4.99, down to about 4.25. But it's still on a $400,000 loan. 3 points or 3.5 points is 3.5% of the loan amount, right? So like, you don't have to be a mathematician to know that a $400,000 loan at 3.5 points, I mean, we're talking about I don't know, 14, 15 grand, right? Just off the top. So you're paying that in additional fees to lower your rate. And we know pretty certainly that we're going to see rates dip again next year. So it's just, again, I wouldn't get too far down that path of paying too much in discount points. Don't forget to unmute yourself now. There we go.
Back to that. Let's go back to this. And I always talk a little bit about affordability versus last year based on what the rates have been doing.
Yeah. So this is again, this is something that we've been talking about and have talked about here recently. So in 2021, right, a $400,000 mortgage you could have financed at around 3.375, right? It's just kind of the average rate. That would have given you a principal and interest payment of roughly $1,768. So the biggest difference there, right, and the delta between those is now 2022 and where interest rates are at. And this was a little generous, right? So this is saying 4.75. That is obviously that factors in an 18% appreciation, right? So we're that, I think 18% is a pretty good barometer for how much home values went up from last year to this year. But ultimately that's going to cost, or that is costing now, almost an additional $700 more a month, because that same $400,000 home is now costing you 18% more, right? So we see the $472,000 loan amount at the current rates of 4.75. You're paying an additional almost $700 a month, right? Now I'll get back to talk about household incomes in the private sector, where wages went up 10.5%. So if you were making, let's call it $8,800 last year, you should be seeing a decent increase of, again, around that 10 or 10.5%. So if your affordability, your payments went up $700, hopefully your wages would have gone up that $900 to offset that difference, right? So that's that's kind of where we're seeing, we're seeing a lot of the kind of the makeup, right? Because something, at some point, something has to give, right? If mortgage rates are at the levels that they are now, right, high fours, home prices have continued to continue to go up. And again, we've talked about the different pockets, right? It's all going to depend on the type of home, where it's located, the condition, right? It's so funny. In the past, we've talked about, I mean, there's really like 3 or 4 main things that dictate how much you can get for your home, and 3 of those things you can't change, right? You can't change where it's located. In most cases, you can't change whether it's a 3.2, a 3.2.5, a 5, whatever it is, unless you're going to add on. You can't change floor plan. So so the biggest thing is you can dictate condition, and that's where we're seeing a lot of the the homes that are going for super top dollar they've got all the bells and whistles, right? So I think those are the main things to think about. But I sent out interesting enough, I sent out an email yesterday. Maybe I posted on social media. April, gosh, what is that date? The week of April 11th, I think. If you're looking to sell your home, that's historically the best time to list. So y'all better get after it. Yeah, if you're thinking about
That is
selling.
the week. We got several coming up. So
We
just a
do.
little bit more on these numbers. So $694 a month, that's $8,328 per year. And if you're on a 30-year note, you added $250,000
Ooh.
to the cost of that home in 1
Yeah.
year. So
Yeah.
get out and get buying now.
Well, and again, it's all about, we have the obviously conversations all the time. I mean, you and us. So, I hear all the time, well, I'm just going to wait.
Yeah.
And again, we saw exactly just in that, in that little blip there, what happened if you waited, right? From last year to this year. And man, not only that, rents aren't going down. I think as of the reports that came out today, year over year, new rents, right? So if you're going to rent a new place, rents are up 17.1%. Right? Like it's not, it's not from that standpoint, it's not getting any cheaper. If you are in a current rental and you're renewing, you're still going up 7 to 9%.
Yeah. I've got a client that we're looking for a new place to lease. I basically encouraged him to stay where he is at. And he said, well, my rent's going from 1,700 to 2,400. So, there you go.
Yeah.
It's going up, it's going to go up where he's moving as well. So,
right.
It's not a good situation to be renting. You definitely need to be looking into owning your own. Well, let's get into our market stats. Are very much the same. It's been 2 weeks since we visited on these, but our numbers remain the same. I think the last time we did meet, I said there's really just not much room for a lot of these to move anymore, maybe other than, the list price to sales price, but days on market's pretty much, you can't get much lower than 5 because people are putting it on the market Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, going under contract on Monday. That's where you get 5 days.
Right.
Pretty difficult to shorten that. And then half a month supply, I doubt they might not even start tracking it when it gets lower than that. I don't know. But anyway, numbers are the same in our, basically in our little pocket of Collin, Denton County here where we're at. You're going to pay anywhere between, most likely, if it's the top-notch property that Chris was talking about earlier, you might be paying 15 to 20% over, not this 5 to 6% average. Still, in my comps I'm pulling every week, I'm still getting in the McKinney, Frisco area, an average of about 8 to 9%, and then a max of 15 to 17% over list. So still our outline areas, Grayson, Parker County, those are your best areas to most likely stay with a little less competition. But you need to know that no matter what you are buying right now, whether it be a raw piece of land, whether it be a fixer-upper, or whether it be new construction and anything in between, you better pull the trigger when you're ready to, when you've looked at it. Amy and I are looking at 5 to 10 acre tracts of land all the way down by Kerrville, and they're basically getting under contract the second that they hit the market, just unimproved land. So, real estate is a market to market, niche to niche type thing. But right now, all the markets and all the niches are kind of doing the same thing. And it is just ultra competitive, I guess, is the way to put it. So Chris and I, we were talking earlier on the affordability versus last year. Basically just ran the numbers out, 250 grand over, 30 years. If you waited to buy, just due to appreciation in housing, the increase in interest rates, the two team together, it's going to end up costing you more money. I just wanted to circle back to this and, give a real life example of how it actually is even quicker than a year. We're looking at a snapshot of 1 year here. I'm going to give you a
Right.
snapshot of about 3.5 weeks on a deal that Chris and I worked on recently. Basically the client, we went under contract I think it was the first week of March. It was probably March 3rd or 4th, somewhere in there, I believe. We went under contract, and our client actually got locked in at 4.375 on the interest rate. And that was that first week of March. So Chris and I were visiting last week and rates were at 5.25. So the scenario that I asked Chris was, if client A had waited to get under contract today, 3.5 weeks later, what would the cost be to buy down to the 4.375 rate? And Chris basically came up with about a $15,000 number as what it would cost them 3.5 weeks later to borrow the same money. Would have cost them about $15,000 to buy that rate down. So also over the course of those 3.5 weeks, that property most likely went up a couple $1,000s in value as well. So ultimately that could have been about a $20,000 3.5 week, what it could cost not to have the trigger when they pulled it. So you got anything to add to that?
No, and again, it's not like, it's not like that's gonna that happens or can happen or will happen. But again, that is, man, a real life, real life scenario where again, it directly could have impacted. And I think on that same scenario, we were kind of measuring appreciation, right? So we were measuring the fact that, hey, what you offered most likely was going to be a little bit higher than what it would appraise for, right? But ultimately over time, you're still going to appreciate, right? So you're going to essentially blow past what it appraised for versus what you bought it for, right? Because that's a big concern right now as well, right? Is like, okay, like I know that it went on the market for like here's another perfect example, home here in McKinney, right? Like downtown McKinney area, 3-bed, 2-bath, 1,500 square feet, went on the market last week for 350, right? My buyer was able to get it under contract for 417, right? So we know that based on comps that it's gonna, it could appraise anywhere from 350 to 380, right? Is most likely where it's gonna appraise. And ultimately they will be responsible for that difference. So again, there are different ways to obviously mitigate that, right? You can different ways to restructure and all that kind of stuff. But in some cases, if you're doing the minimum 5% down or whatever on a conventional loan, well, there's not a whole lot of ways to restructure other than just coming out of pocket for that additional amount. But ultimately, with we have kind of appreciation calculator that will determine, hey, in the next 2, 3, 4 years, if that, right, you're already recouping that, what I think it was like a $15,000 difference in appraisal on that one scenario. So again, you're talking about it's essentially a wash, right? So you're at this particular point, because comps haven't caught up yet, you're paying $15,000 more, but the idea of waiting could have also cost you $15,000 to $20,000 more because rates jumped up significantly. So again, at the end of the day, it's a wash. Don't I think the biggest things that we have, the conversations that we're having, is like, don't feel like you're overpaying because the market's not, it's not, there's still a huge inventory issue, right? We don't have enough homes for the amount of people that are needing to purchase them, and ultimately builders aren't building enough to catch up, right? And from what I'm hearing, they don't necessarily want to, because they're not gonna just throw a bunch of supply into the market, right? Because we don't want to see a repeat of 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
So there's I think we're going to have this inventory issue for, for a while, like 5-10 years maybe, right? So that's again, if like conversation that I'm having for people that are saying, oh, I'm just going to wait, I'm like, okay, well, you're waiting 10 years because at a minimum, right? And then at that, you're now buying in Oklahoma because because in 5 or 10 years, I mean, everything's gonna be built out 75 and the tollway up to, Salina, Gunner, and then obviously on our side, 75 all the way up to Denison, right?
Yeah.
So yes, waiting, there's a huge cost to waiting. We cannot beat that enough. Yeah, it is definitely not the answer for sure.
There are a lot of answers to winning in this market, and waiting is not one of those.
One, for sure.
Well, man, there's appreciate all the valuable info as usual. I guess we will get together a little later, and we'll do this again next week.
Perfect.
Hopefully,
Perfect.
the rates will be ticked down a little more, maybe.
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
So, all right, man. Appreciate it. Have a great weekend.
All right, guys. We'll see you later.
Guaranteed Palooza tomorrow night.
See you at the GR Palooza, baby.
All right, man. Appreciate it.